What is up, YouTube? JankyYGO here. My name is Michael, and today we're going over Steafen's 2011 deck profile. Now, Steafen has informed me what this deck is trying to do, and we can see even back then Steafen was not the best at building decks. We're gonna excuse the extra deck because Steafen said, they were working with what they got. So, anyway, let's jump into it. So we got two light radiate Dallas. This is kind of what our payoff is. So, for those of you newer to the game, this card must be special summoned by having 4 or more light monsters in your graveyard and cannot be special summoned by other ways. And once per turn, you can target 1 field spell and 2 other cards on the field and destroy them. So the goal of this deck was to summon Light Ray Daedalus with the seal of Orichalcos, which cannot be destroyed once per turn by card effect, and just get a free pop 2. No, I'm not joking. That was what the whole deck is going for, and we're gonna go over some cards to improve this deck for that idea specifically. But as you can see, we're only running 1 seal, but yeah, we're getting into it. Next up, we got 1 Arcana Force Temperance. This is just another Kuriboh. You can discard it, and you take no battle damage from that battle. That's what it's there for. Worth noting, Chaos Sorcerer was limited at this time, but Chaos Sorcerer is our one of our other payoffs that you just, you can banish cards and all that. So yes, it was limited at the time, and I think Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning might have been banned at this time still. If it wasn't banned, then Steafen didn't own it, because this is a deck Steafen owned in real life, and Steafen was working with what they had. So yeah. Next up, Light Ray Sorcerer. While you have 3 or more of your light monsters that are banished, it's the only way that this card can be special summoned. Once per turn, you can target 1 of your banished light monsters and 1 face-up monster on the field. You shuffle the first target in the deck and banish the second target, and this card can't attack. So it was a powered down Chaos Sorcerer. This card is okay. It is one of the other boss monsters in the deck, and one of the ways to get this monster out is Soul of Purity and Light. So Soul of Purity and Light says this card cannot be normal summoned or set, but can only be special summoned by removing from play 2 light monsters in your graveyard. All monsters your opponent controls lose 300 attack during their battle phase only. So as we can see, this card hasn't, gotten errataed yet, or with problem solving card text, so it doesn't banish 2, it's removed from play, which is the old templating. Steafen is also running 1 copy of Zephyr the Elite as one of the dark targets in the deck. Zephyr is okay. Zephyr's a really good card in general. I believe Zephyr's whole point was to pick up the Seal of Orichalcos and replay it, as that's the only real good target in the deck. Maybe other than, maybe if you had to summon a Kuriboh, you bounce that back. Next up, we got DD Warrior Lady. It's just solid removal. DD Warrior Lady saw fringe play all the way up into this time, so it wasn't really too uncommon to see in Chaos decks. People who were still, trying to play Chaos would still play a DD Warrior Lady sometimes. Next up, 2 Shining Angels. This was to throw out, I'm assuming, your DD Warrior Lady or Wing Kuribohs if you absolutely needed it. Next up is Dimensional Alchemist. And so you activate this card, banish the top card from your deck, and if you do, this card gains 500 attack until the end of this turn. When this card you control is destroyed and sent to your graveyard, you can target a banished monster and add it to your hand. It's a decent piece of recursion that you can throw out with Summoner Monk. Tsukiyomi was also at 1, and Steafen has told me that they used to love this card. So Steafen used to love this card, that's why it's here. And Tsukiyomi still was pretty decent back at this time. It was starting to, slowly get power crept out at this point. But, it still saw play from time to time. We got our 1 copy of Summoner Monk. Worth noting, Summoner Monk was at 2 at this point. So having 1 wasn't like a big deal, although you should probably run 2. We have pre-errata Sangan, of course, because this was when This was Sangin's effect back in the day, which wasn't a hard once per turn, and it was limited at this time. Next up, we got Spirit Reefer, just a hard card for certain decks to deal with. Then we got our 2 Kuribohs and 2 Winged Kuribohs. So yeah, Steafen told me that they saw the Flute of Summoning Kuriboh and was like, "Oh, I'm gonna make a Kuriboh deck," and this is what they came up with. The only issue with that is that like they're not running 3 of them, and yes, these were the only Kuribohs out at the time, so you know, making a Kuriboh deck wasn't really feasible back then. But it is what it is. But anyway, we're gonna move on. Heavy Storm was at 1 at this format, and almost every deck main decked it, surprisingly. Just in case you did run into back row decks, they would, you know, run a Heavy Storm for some reason in the main deck. Like, that wasn't really all that uncommon for, I really don't know why they didn't just side deck it. 3 1 day apiece. 1 day apiece is another way to not only draw through your deck, but is also, you know, neither player can't take damage until the end of this turn. This card is at 1, I believe. Let's check that. Yes, this card is at 1, but was at 3 in this format. Next up, we got Mind Control. Worth noting, Mind Control was at, I want to say, was either at 1 or 3. I don't remember what Mind Control was at, but I know that it wasn't really considered like that great of a card in the Xyz era until almost every deck became like a rank 4 deck. When almost every deck was like a rank 4 deck, then Mind Control started being a little bit better, but it still never really caught on. Then we got Dark Hole as a one of that people just main deck this as well. Cards from the Sky, in my honest opinion, is probably one of the worst cards Steafen has put into this deck. This is you banish a light fairy from your hand. And if you do draw 2 cards, then you can't special summon or conduct your battle phase. It's supposed to be the light counter, the light version of Allure of Darkness, but it's strictly worse in every conceivable way. First of all, you have to have the monster first, and then secondly, you have a downside of not being able to conduct a special summon or battle phase. So it's terrible overall, and that means with the way it's worded, you can't special summon at all during the turn, so you can't special summon first, then activate this card. You can't attack first, then play this card. If you do any of those, you cannot activate this card. This card's really bad, and honestly, if I would run Terraforming over this or Upstart Goblin. Pot of Duality. So Pot of Duality was at 2 in this format, but Pot of Duality was still a pretty expensive card, if I recall correctly, unless it just got reprinted recently. But this card used to be a staple, surprisingly, because a lot of the time decks would be slow enough back then that they would, you know, play Pot of Duality, set a monster, or summon or normal summon a monster, and then maybe set some back row and pass. Like that wasn't really too uncommon during this era. The meta decks would be like, oh hey, we're gonna, you know, XD summon a bunch on our first turn, but that didn't always happen, and a lot of like rogue decks and janky decks like this still ran it if they could, because Pod Duality was a really good card. We got 1 MST. MST was unlimited this format, but Steafen only was running 1. Go figure. Book of Moon was a staple at this point in time and was at 1. So, Book of Moon would go into every single deck to disrupt your opponent from Link Summoning, and if your opponent did manage to Link Summon, maybe you forgot to activate it, you could flip the monster face down, as most of the relevant Link monsters at this time actually didn't have a ton of defense, with the exception of, like, Maestroke. Then we got the Flute of Summoning Kuribohs, which, you know, summons either adds or summons a Kuriboh from deck. So, it's pretty decent. So this is the card that we get to talk about, and this is a whole lot. Alright, so the Seal of Orichalcos. All your monsters gain 500 attack. Once per turn, this card cannot be destroyed by card effects While you control two monsters or two or more face-up attack position monsters, your opponent cannot attack monster or monsters with the lowest attack. For an attack, if this card is activated, you destroy all special summon monsters you control, if any, and you cannot special summon from the extra deck. You can only activate one Seal of Orichalcos per duel. So, this card, when it came out, as you can see, there was a lot of they were really, really scared of this card. So what is my thoughts on this card, and what do I think of building a deck around it? So if you're gonna play this card, you're definitely gonna want to play a deck that doesn't need its extra deck, and really wants that 500 attack boost. But there's no deck that actually really needs all that stuff, in my honest opinion. There are decks that don't really need the extra deck. There are decks that don't really that so that can OTK, or this can help OTK. But this deck doesn't really do either. In my honest opinion, the Seal of Orichalcos is a pretty weak field spell, even for the era that it came out in. During the anime, it was a lot different and a lot stronger. But in the but once we got it in real life, it's really, really weakened and really, really dumbed down. Next up we got Bottomless Trap Pool. I believe Bottomless was at 2 in this format, and so was Torrential. And these were both staples, and people ran them all the time. But anyway, for the extra deck, Steafen bought a one or two of the what's it called? The XE starter deck, and had some packs and all that. So Photon Strike Bouncer, for you can use it with any of these right here. It's actually pretty decent. Like, even by today's standard, it's not terrible. So during either player's turn, when a monster effect is activated, on your opponent's side of the field, you detach a material, you negate the effect, and inflict 1,000. So it negates a monster effect. It's not terrible. Gem-Knight Pearl. This card is the best card. No, I like to meme it, but it's a pretty bad card, but it did see play back in the day, because it got over a lot of cards, actually. That's the reason why. It was a big beat stick. But the downside of this card is that with the Seal of Orichalcos out, you can't have a 3100 beater, unfortunately, because if you summon this, then you play the seal, this gets blown up. If you play the seal first, you can't summon Gem-Knight Pearl. So that's one of the downsides of this. Next up, we got Utopia. Utopia was a staple because it was a 2500 monster, and it could easily, and it negated attacks. And that's pretty much it. This card was actually also pretty good back in the day, because there was a lot of times where people just set a monster and pass, and Photon Pupillar Operative was the out to doing that, as, it would force them into attack position, and then they'd lose 600, so Pupillar Operative could actually out a lot of cards. Next up is, and it also comboed well with the Book of Moon and the Tsukiyomi. Next up is Maestroke, the Symphony Djinn. Now, this card is a card that has been power crept out, but it is probably the best Xyz monster in the extra deck for a Seal of Orichalcos deck. And now, for, in this one in particular. So what does it do? So it Book of Moons at a, spell speed 1. I have a video on spell speeds if you don't know what that means. But basically, it's just it's a once per turn effect, meaning you can only do it on your turn when you have priority. So you can't chain it to anything. But it has the second effect, and this is the most important part. If a Djinn Xyz monster you control would be destroyed, you can detach one material from that monster instead. So what that means is if you summon Maestroke in defense position, because that's 2300 defense, and then you play the seal, you can actually save Maestroke. That means Maestroke is probably the best Djinn, are the best Xyz monster for this deck because of that. Now, the next card is also pretty decent. We got number 17, Leviathan Dragon. The Leviathan Dragon, you detach a material from this card and it gains 500 attack. And then if it has no material, it can't attack directly. So this card did see a decent amount of play. If you're playing, rank 3s, you just throw it in here because it was a big beat stick. And you almost never detach the second material because you wanted the option of attacking directly. And 2500 was actually good enough most of the time. Next, we got Tempo. The Tempo is actually, used to actually see a decent amount of play. And there was a, it might be Tempo or might be another one that was actually part of a really funny OTK with Maestroke. So this card lets you steal. Okay, so this one lets you steal a material from your opponent's Xyz monster, and that was relevant because we were in the Xyz format. So Tempo did see play because you could just steal an opponent's Xyz material. Next up is Mewtwo Rhythm, the String Djinn. This is the card. This is one of the cards with the Djinn, or with Maestroke. So when a Djinn monster you control is attacking an opponent's monster during damage step, you detach one Xyz material from this card. The attacking monster's attack is doubled until the end phase. So the idea is that like you get like Maestroke, and then you double its attack with this, and it goes to good old 3600. But there's another card that makes this OTK possible. And maybe I'll do a dumb deck on that at some point. But next up, this is our last card we're going to talk about that also helps with the OTK. Mellow Melody, the Brash Djinn, which is 2 level 3 monsters, and it makes you can target a Djinn monster and it, gets to attack twice. So this also helps the Maestroke Symphony. So that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. So improvements of this deck is one, you can't really play it anymore because of 1-day piece being limited, and you wouldn't really want to play it. But if you did want to play it, one, you'd have to play with the new Sandgan. Two, I would probably play the one copy of Terraforming. And cut one of these cards. Definitely cut cards from the sky in favor of some of the new stuff, or just play, a good old, or just play a Kuriboh deck. Those decks are a lot more fun, and they actually have like a bunch of Kuribohs that you can play. But anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. If it's your birthday today, like it is to me, happy birthday! And if you want to send me any cool deck profiles or replays, my email is in the description. And of course, and as always, have a wonderful day.